Forget everything you think you know about leadership. Forget the crowns, the armies, the polished speeches. What if the most powerful person in a nation wasn't a king, but a woman sitting quietly under a palm tree? What if true authority didn't come from a throne, but from a divine whisper? Because that is exactly where our story begins. Israel was a nation drowning. Decades of peace had dissolved into a suffocating cycle of oppression and fear. Imagine this: a people once delivered by miracles, now groaning under the iron fist of King Jabin of Canaan and his ruthless commander, Sisera. 900 iron chariots, bond true war machines. For 20 long years, the cries of a desperate people faded into silence. Villages were abandoned, roads deserted, trade vanished. Hope, it seemed, had simply evaporated. Men, once warriors, now hid. Leaders, once vocal, were silent. Tribes, once united, were fragmented. There was no king, no commander, no plan. Weapons were scarce, yes, but something far more vital had disappeared: courage. Families lived under constant threat. Mothers hid their children at the distant rumble of Sisera's chariots. This wasn't just physical oppression, it was a psychological weight, crushing the very soul of a people made for freedom. But even in the deepest despair, a cry began to rise. A collective groan, a primal scream echoing across the scattered tribes. It wasn't eloquent. It wasn't planned. It was a raw, desperate remembrance. We have a God who has liberated us before. And God heard that cry. It was at this absolute low point, when all earthly solutions had failed, that heaven began to move, not with thunder, not with earthquakes, but with a woman with a firm spirit, already positioned by God. While the people wept, he had already prepared his answer. And that answer would come from the most unlikely place, from the shade of a palm tree, where someone listened more to God than to fear. Her name was Deborah. She held no official title beyond judge, and prophetess spot roles often seen as secondary, especially for a woman in that era. Her courtroom wasn't a palace, but an open-air space between Ramah and Bethel. No luxury, no standing army. Yet, the people of Israel journeyed to her, not out of curiosity, but out of desperate necessity. There, in the open, before everyone, she exercised a profound authority. She judged their cases fairly. She discerned not just the facts, but the very heart of matters. She listened beyond the words. She heard the secrets of heaven. Deborah was a point of balance in a time of utter instability. She wasn't there by ambition, but by divine calling. Her name means bee-eyed, and like a bee, she was diligent, wise, and when necessary, fierce. She was connected to the people, and she was connected to heaven. This made her the living link between human clamor and divine response. Her presence was a lamppost in the middle of the darkness. She wasn't a leader out of ambition, but out of a mission. So, I ask you, where are you waiting for traditional power to appear? Where are you dismissing the quiet, unexpected places God might be cultivating true authority? What if God isn't looking for crowns, but for quiet obedience under a palm tree? Are you willing to be that unlikely vessel, simply by being available to hear and act on his voice, even when no one else is listening? Have you ever been handed a divine assignment, a clear command from God, and your first thought was, but what if? What if I am not enough? What if I fail? What if I need someone else to go with me? This isn't just a Bible story. It is a mirror reflecting our own human hesitation in the face of God's audacious plans. Because that is exactly what happened next. It was there, under that same palm tree, that Deborah received the word that would change the course of a nation. The time for waiting was over. The time for groaning had ceased. Heaven had released an order, and this order came straight to Deborah's heart. It was time to fight. God had decided to act, and he had chosen Deborah as his channel. She rose, not as a spectator of oppression, but as a messenger of a divine turnaround. God revealed a name to her, Barak, son of Abinoam, from the tribe of Naphtali, who had probably been silent for too long, sunk in the same paralysis that consumed so many other leaders in Israel. But Deborah didn't hesitate. She called him, and when he arrived, she didn't mince words. She didn't offer a suggestion. She didn't ask a favor. She declared, "Has not the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you?" Understand this, it wasn't an invitation. It was a reminder. The order already existed. God had already given the instructions. Barak was to gather 10,000 men from the tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun and go up to Mount Tabor. There, God himself would deliver Sisera into his hands. Deborah's speech was straight as an arrow. Her voice was not asking, it was activating. It was meant to shake the slumbering faith of a commander who desperately needed to remember who the true general was. But Barak's response, it was revealing. "If you go with me, I will go," he said. "But if you do not go with me, I will not go." There was faith there, yes. He believed Deborah's word, but there was also hesitation. There was fear. Barak needed her presence to feel safe. He needed a crutch. He needed visible assurance, and Deborah didn't censor him. She agreed to go. Yes, but she also issued a powerful prophecy. The honor of victory would not be his. It would go to a woman. This wasn't a criticism, it was a divine redirection. The mission would not be completed in the traditional, masculine way. God was writing a plot where the unlikely would be the protagonists. Deborah didn't just prophesy the battle, she made it real. She left the shade of the palm tree. She went up the mountain. She transformed from judge to warrior. Alongside Barak, she began to turn the page in Israel's history. So, think about this. Where is God calling you to step out, and you are demanding a co-pilot? Where are you letting fear dictate your obedience? God's command is often enough. He doesn't need our confidence. Are you willing to embrace the discomfort of divine instruction, even if it means God gets all the glory in an unexpected way? Will you let him activate your courage, even when your heart whispers, "But what if?" What happens when you bring radical faith to a fight armed with impossible odds? What happens when human logic screams, defeat, but heaven declares, victory? This isn't just about courage. It is about seeing God show up in ways that shatter every expectation. This is where the improbable became inevitable. Deborah could have stayed under the palm tree. She had delivered God's message. She had called the right commander. She had pointed the way to victory. Her part, by all conventional measures, was done. But she didn't stay. She went. Her decision to go to battle was not impulsive, it was intentional. In times of war, presence communicates power. And Deborah's presence on that battlefield was more than symbolic. It was spiritual. She carried no sword, but she carried authority. She commanded no tactics, but she released faith. Her figure in the middle of that assembling army was like a living banner, a visible reminder that God himself was at the forefront of that fight. Deborah's courage wasn't measured by muscles or weapons, but by the willingness to leave the safety of judgment and enter the raw, dangerous terrain of the fight. And that changed everything. Barak, who previously hesitated, was now advancing. The scattered men of the tribes began to line up. A woman was going to war, and that fact alone was awakening those who were sleeping. They ascended Mount Tabor together. From that high vantage point, they could see the Kishon Valley below, where Sisera had already positioned his terrifying iron chariots. The difference between the two armies was striking. One had structure, the other had promise. One had cutting, edge weaponry. The other had divine direction. And Deborah, she was standing squarely in the midst of that promise. At the right moment, she rose and said the phrase that would echo like thunder in Barak's soul. "Rise up, for this is the day. The Lord has delivered Sisera into your hands." This wasn't just encouragement, it was the password to heaven. The time had come, the spiritual window was open, and it was necessary to act now. Deborah didn't just accompany, she activated. Where her voice sounded, faith rose up. Where her presence was, fear receded. She didn't need a sword because her weapon was the unwavering conviction that God had already won, even before the first blow. At that moment, it was no longer about the difference in power between armies. It was about who was with God, and the woman who came out from under a palm tree now trod the ground of the battlefield as one who already knew the end of the story. When Barak descended from Mount Tabor with his 10,000 men, to human eyes, it seemed the beginning of an announced defeat. On one side, a lightly armed tribal army without modern equipment. On the other, Sisera's powerful iron chariots, gliding like giants over the Kishon Valley, ready to crush any attempt at resistance. It was unequal. It was improbable. It was impossible. But it was also the perfect scenario for God to act. The biblical account doesn't give us all the logistical details, but it provides clear clues to a profound divine intervention. Deborah's song later reveals that even the stars fought against Sisera. There was confusion, panic, and a supernatural movement in the enemy camp. The Kishon River, normally flowing quietly, rose up. Many scholars believe God sent a sudden, torrential storm, turning the firm ground into treacherous mud. The iron chariots, the pride of Canaan, became bogged down and useless. Sisera, who so trusted in his war technology, saw his advantage crumble before his very eyes. What was strength became weakness. What was certainty became chaos. And the Israelites, led by Barak and spurred on by the faith released by Deborah, descended with courage. The people who had been hiding yesterday were now advancing without fear. They were not just fighting for freedom, they were being carried by a promise. Each Israelite blow seemed guided by an invisible hand. The battle turned into flight, and the flight into total defeat. Not one of the Canaanite soldiers survived. Not one. Jabin's oppressive force was broken that day, absolutely. It was the kind of victory no human plan could explain. Only heaven. Where is logic telling you to surrender, but your spirit is whispering, God? Are you willing to step out of your comfort zone and into the chaos, trusting that God's presence is your ultimate weapon? Are you ready for heaven to fight your battles in ways you could never imagine, so that He gets all the glory? You think you know how the hero's journey ends. Think again. Sometimes the biggest victories happen in the most unexpected places, by the most unexpected hands. After the chaos, after the chariots were swallowed by the mud, Sisera, the feared commander, jumped out of his chariot and fled on foot. His sandals kicked up dust, sweat ran down his face. His heavy armor, once a symbol of power, was now just a useless burden. He, who was once a terror, was now just a desperate man trying to survive. Sisera fled, seeking refuge. His eyes scanned the familiar landscape until he spotted a tent. It was the dwelling of Heber the Kenite, who maintained a peace alliance with Jabin, king of Canaan. To Sisera, it seemed a safe haven. And it was there that a new character, one you might never expect, entered the story: Jael. Jael was Heber's wife, a desert woman, accustomed to silence, to quick decisions, to survival in a harsh land. She saw Sisera approaching, exhausted, without strength, and without hesitation. She went out to meet him. "Come in, my lord," she said, her voice calm, her gestures gentle. "Do not be afraid." Sisera entered, believing he was safe. He asked for water, but Jael gave him milk. Warm, comforting, capable of inducing sleep. She covered him with a blanket, and he, tired and trusting, fell asleep. It was the rest of confidence, but also of illusion. Jael was not a warrior. She was not part of Israel's army. She wasn't on Mount Tabor, but at that very moment, in the quiet of her tent, She carried in herself the outcome of the battle. She took a hammer and a tent peg, common tools in the hands of a woman in the camp, but in the hands of someone used by God, they would become instruments of divine judgment. With precision and courage, Jael drove the peg into Sisera's head while he slept. A decisive act, without fanfare, without an army, without witnesses. But with eternal weight. Shortly after, Barak arrived, following the tracks of the enemy. And there was Jael, standing at the door of her tent. "Come," she said, "and I will show you the man you are looking for." She not only defeated the enemy, she delivered his defeat into the hands of those who were pursuing him. Deborah's prophecy was fulfilled with chilling accuracy. The honor of victory went to a woman, but not the one everyone expected. Not the one on the battlefield, but the one at home, ready, sensitive, courageous. Jael sealed Sisera's fate with her own hands. This is a profound reminder: God doesn't just work through the official channels or the obvious heroes. He uses anyone, anywhere, at any time, if they are simply available. Are you underestimating the quiet, seemingly insignificant moments in your own life? Are you waiting for a grand stage, when God might be calling you to act with courage in the quiet of your tent? What unexpected tent peg moment is God preparing for you, where your simple obedience can bring about a world-changing victory? What do you do after the greatest victory of your life, after heaven has fought for you, after the impossible has become reality, after the enemy is utterly crushed? Deborah didn't seek recognition. She didn't bask in the glory. She sang, and what came out of her lips was not just gratitude, it was a song. A hymn of war and worship that would cross generations. Her words were not rehearsed, they were like fire, coming straight from the Spirit. Each verse carried memory, praise, and direction. The Song of Deborah, recorded in Judges chapter 5, is more than just a poetic record of victory. It is a summons to remembrance. Right at the beginning, she cries out, "Awake, awake, Deborah, awake, awake, utter a song." It was as if she were calling not only herself, but an entire nation, to awaken to what God had just done. She begins by exalting the leaders who volunteered, the tribes who responded, the people who showed up. But she also fearlessly denounces those who omitted themselves, who stayed home: Reuben, Gilead, Dan, Asher. It is a song of honor, but also of warning. It celebrates courage and exposes cowardice. Deborah doesn't skimp on strong images. She paints the scene of the battle with sharp, vivid words. From the heavens the stars fought, from their courses they fought against Sisera. The conflict wasn't only earthly, it was cosmic. The song reveals that what happened in the valley was a reflection of what was moving in the sky. And then comes Jael, the woman in the tent, who now becomes the center of prophetic poetry. Most blessed among women, most blessed among women in tents. Deborah doesn't just recognize Jael's act, she eternalizes it. The scene is described in visceral detail, highlighting the firmness and precision of the blow that brought down the enemy commander. More than a memory of the war, this song is a mirror of Deborah's heart. It shows a leader who didn't seek applause, but understood the profound power of remembering. She knew that forgotten victories generate future defeats. That is why she sang. And in the end, her voice prophesies, "So may all your enemies perish, Lord, but may those who love you be like the sun when it rises in its strength." The song ends as it began, with direction, with words that not only look back, but illuminate the path ahead. Deborah was not a common figure in Israel. She broke paradigms. She defied expectations. She shattered structures and showed that God does not choose according to human standards. Her life became a symbol of leadership molded not by ambition, but by obedience. She didn't seek power, she simply answered a call. And that answer was enough to change the course of a nation. In a time where the absence of leaders was a reflection of the people's spiritual estrangement, Deborah was a living exception. She listened when no one else listened. She positioned herself when many hid. Her faith was not silent, it was active. She judged with justice, prophesied with clarity, and acted with courage. Her authority did not come from a social position, but from the raw, undeniable presence of God in her life. Deborah shows us that true leadership is born from intimacy with heaven. She had no personal army, but she carried words that moved mountains. Her influence was not imposed, it was recognized. The people went up to her because they knew there was divine direction there. And when she needed to go beyond words, she went. She rose from the shade of the palm tree and entered the battlefield without hesitating. She is also a powerful symbol of balance. She carried the wisdom of a judge, the sensitivity of a prophetess, and the bravery of a warrior. Each of these dimensions was harmonized in her mission. Deborah didn't have to choose between being spiritual or strategic, between being a woman or being a leader. She was all of that at the same time, without dividing her identity. The song she sang at the end of the victory reveals more than her voice. It reveals her vision. A leader who knew how to recognize the valiant, confront the cowardly, and exalt God above all. She saw beyond the immediate moment. Her faith was linked to memory, and her leadership to truth. Even today, Deborah's name carries weight, not only because of her incredible achievements, but because of her posture. She reminds us that an obedient heart is the greatest weapon in God's hands. That firm faith can lift a people, and that leadership inspired by Him always leaves a legacy, not of dominion, but of liberation. Deborah's story did not remain trapped in the time of the judges. It crosses the centuries and still speaks forcefully today. Her life is not just an old account, but a living compass for anyone who wants to walk with God with courage, faith, and purpose. The first great lesson is this: obedience is worth more than the scenario. Deborah did not wait for conditions to be ideal to answer the call. Israel was in crisis. Leaders were silent. Fear dominated. But none of that prevented her surrender. She heard God's voice and positioned herself, even if the environment screamed otherwise. This reminds us that we don't need the world's permission to do what God has commanded us. Another powerful lesson is in her posture of service. Deborah did not put herself above the people. She placed herself alongside them. She judged fairly, listened patiently, and spoke with authority, not to dominate, but to guide. This challenges us in a time when so many want position without purpose. She shows that true leadership is born from the willingness to serve, not from the desire to be served. Deborah also teaches us about active faith. She did not remain only in intercession or spiritual guidance. When necessary, she entered the battle. She showed that spirituality and action go together. That believing is also moving. That trusting God includes obeying, even when the path seems risky. Her life also inspires us about discernment and courage. She did not act on emotion. She acted on divine direction. Her decisions came from above. And at the same time, she did not back down from the responsibility that this brought. When Barak hesitated, she stood firm. When God spoke, she did not doubt. When the time came, she did not hide. And finally, Deborah teaches us about memory and legacy. Her song was a landmark. She knew that victories need to be remembered, that God's deeds cannot be forgotten. Her story was recorded because her life was a seed, and even today, its fruits reach us. Deborah was an answer in her time, and she continues to be an inspiration in ours. So, what song will you sing after your victory? What legacy of courage, obedience, and active faith will you leave for those who follow? Will you remember what God has done, and let that memory fuel your future? The choice, as always, is yours.